Authorities detain 3 men as they prepare to take part in armed violence in the Middle East. Their radicalization, triggered by the Israel-Hamas conflict, saw them take steps like practicing with a toy gun and visiting a shooting range. And more on this, I'm joined by Kenneth Yeo, Associate Research Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Yeo. These 3 detainees detained under ISA, they cited what's happening, online content they're seeing on the Israel-Hamas conflict as reason for their wanting to go to the Middle East to fight that particular fight. Do you see a significant increase in so-called self-radicalisation in Singapore, and has that happened since that conflict erupted with greater intensity between Israel and the Hamas fighting group?
Right. Thank you so much for the question. I would like to point out that the increase in the number of self-radicalization cases started since 2020, where we see multiple youths, adolescents being radicalized online. But beyond that, I would say that the global crisis fuels local threats. So, for example, back in the 1980s, 1990s, we have the Soviet-Afghan War, which also attracted many foreign fighters. Back in 2014, we've also seen the declaration of the Islamic State in Syria, Iraq, also attracting many foreign fighters in the region to participate in the conflict. Fortunately for us in Singapore, the authorities, ISD, is able to detect and also interdict these threats in a very swift and decisive manner.
All right, it's interesting you point out, because we keep saying that conflict between Israel and Hamas, and that began 2023 as a main reason. But in fact, you're saying you've been seeing this since at least 2020, and if not even before that, due to these things you mentioned. So global crises, and I quote you, can fuel local threats. Therefore, Singapore would not be the only country that is vulnerable to this. Within the region, we are seeing this as well.
Right. If we look at the region as a whole, I would say the terrorism threat has decreased significantly within the same time period since 2020 for various reasons. In Indonesia, it's mainly because of the 2018 anti-terrorism law that's introduced. And for the Philippines, we've seen the implementation of Executive Order 70. Both policies in the Indonesia and Philippines have demobilized many of these terrorists through mass arrests and mass surrenders, and that led to a momentum of declining threats in the region. Although there is a reduced threat in the region overall, I've noted that there's an attack last year in Malaysia, the Ulu Tiram attack, which also signals that terrorism is a declining threat, but not a threat that's completely eliminated. The question is then why the Israel-Hamas conflict has not resulted in an overall increase in the threat landscape in Southeast Asia, as in whether the extremists has not capitalized on this narrative to recruit and radicalize individuals, as we've seen in the Syrian conflict, as we've seen in the Afghan conflict. And although we do not have clear answers to this yet, I can posit 3 hypotheses. The first hypothesis is really the momentum from the demobilization programs in the 2 major countries suffering from terrorism, mainly Indonesia and the Philippines. The second hypothesis that I postulate is really the local domestic affairs within these 2 countries has preoccupied the mind space of the locals, and therefore foreign conflicts, as we've seen before, the Soviet-Afghan War, the Syrian civil war, that has increased the recruitment of terrorists within the region. We don't see a similar increase because Indonesia, for example, is dealing with the controversies of Jokowi's legacy. And also in the Philippines, particularly the southern Philippines, they are dealing with the upcoming Bangsamoro election, which is the first election of the Bangsamoro region in this year. So the third hypothesis, really, it's the affiliations within the terrorist groups in Southeast Asia as compared to what we've seen in Israel and Hamas. Mainly, the extremist groups in this region are primarily Sunni Muslims, Sunni Islamists. Whereas what we see in the Middle East, the escalation of conflict we see today, it's really the affiliates of Iran, being Hamas, Hezbollah, and
Sorry,
Houthis.
Mr.
And
if I could just come in very quickly to sum up. So, in fact, all these different factors, whether intentional or non-intentional, domestically and internationally, have added up to this decreased risk of self-radicalization. But even so, one needs to look ahead. By the time one has to deal with the rise in terrorism, it's often too late. Do you think this country, this region, is it working together with the right kind of preemptive measures to make sure we deal with the problem before it becomes a problem?
That's a great question. Thank you so much. There are many mechanisms within this region that that ASEAN, for example, is embarked on to deal with the terrorism threat. For example, there is the Trilateral Cooperative Arrangement, which, although does not deal with the self-radicalization issue, deals with border hardening programs, policies between Malaysia, Philippines, and Indonesia, which are countries that are most affected by terrorism through migration. We've also seen collaboration in the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing realms, which allows the authorities to interdict the funds of terrorist groups, transfers of funds of terrorist groups before something devastating can happen. More specifically and more importantly, ASEAN has embarked in the Bali Work Plan for early warning response and early response systems mechanisms in 2018. And since Malaysia is the ASEAN chair this year, we should expect an update of this early warning and early response plan that would bring us forward in dealing with the self-radicalization cases within the region.
Okay, final question here, Mr. Yeo, because it matters. And Indonesia and Singapore have been standouts, certainly in the attempt to rehabilitate people who have fallen victim to self-radicalization. Is enough being done in this area? Final question.
Thank you. So this is not an area of my expertise, but I would leave a few comments with regards to the Singapore context. Whereas Singapore takes a three-pronged approach to rehabilitating detained individuals affiliated to terrorism cases. So this three-pronged approach is really the religious, the psychological, and the vocational approach. I will emphasize a little bit about the religious approach because this differs quite significantly from a regular crime, where there's a group called RRG, Religious Rehabilitation Group, that has done good job in rehabilitating inmates to deem them fit to reintegrate back to the society. So there are policies within Singapore to help detained individuals to seek help, rehabilitate, and reintegrate back to society.
Thanks so much for those.
The other.
Pardon me, I'm sorry, we've run out of time, but thanks so much for all those insights there. Kenneth Yeo from the Rajaratnam School of International Studies.